Push the record button. Hi, I'm Dr. Susan Thompson. Welcome to the Integrative Therapies Institute. This is module 7 or 8, depending on how you're counting. And for today, our guest speaker, Dr. Jana Whitten, is going to be talking on the yoga application and integration into therapy. So Jana right now is in Florida and fortunately safe from the effects of the hurricane, maybe still doing some cleanup?
Yes, there are still yard trash everywhere and we have no idea when they're going to clean it, but so far so good.
It's a slow process and I'm grateful that you're safe and sound.
Yes.
So Jana and I met back in 2010. It was October, and it was Italy. She was one of the folks who signed up and also presented at really the equivalent of what we're doing here, only in a setting called Italy, in Tuscany, where in addition to weaving in different kinds of presentations, we went to beautiful places like Pisa and Lucca and Siena, Florence, Assisi, and we got to meet some really great people. And I'm so appreciative that you were willing to be one of our speakers. And in the interim, too, our paths crossed again because Jana, in her capacity at Capella as a faculty member, was the faculty supervisor for a doc student who happened to have been one of my master's students and a resident in counseling. So what are the odds, right?
Yes, yes. Small world, small world.
Yeah. So I'm going to let you, Jana, tell us a little bit more about your background and then go ahead and launch into what you want to tell us. Thanks for being here.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Yeah, this is very exciting. I always love to share what I've learned about yoga and its applications to therapy. And I think that many people are discovering that the two worlds are quite similar and different, but complementary. And so it's exciting to see that more people are becoming interested in integrating yoga into therapy. So I started doing it kind of accidentally. Hate to say that, especially when we get to the ethics part of all this. I was learning, I was kind of in the beginning stages of my yoga journey, and I was in my doctoral program at the time. And of course I had to do my dissertation, and I was going to do something on depression or anxiety with exercise, because exercise has always been very therapeutic for me. But then I realized it had been, I mean, when you do a review of the literature, it had been done for so many years, it didn't need to be done again. So at the same time, I started teaching yoga at a gym, and ironically, I taught yoga before I'd ever taken yoga, if you can imagine that. Yes, I worked at a gym and they said, "Do you want to teach a yoga class?" I said, "Sure." So I went and bought a Pilates book because Pilates and yoga look the same. And I would photocopy the pages and I would cut out all the pictures and put them in a sequence. And anyway, so it was a train wreck for sure, but it captured my interest immediately. And then I started to get some training and I started practicing myself and realized how much it helped me with anxiety. At the time, at that point in my life, I was struggling with some sleeping issues, some depression, and I was just amazed at how much it benefited me in so many ways. So I said, well, why don't I do this for my doctoral dissertation? So I ended up doing a study with adults using yoga to help treat depression. So I had adults who, have all scored mild to moderate to severe on a depression inventory, and they did yoga for a couple months, and the results were amazing. So that was really the kickstart for me. And so I did that in 2002, 2003. And there was very little research on yoga and any kind of mental illness. In fact, maybe 4 articles on some aspect of yoga with mental illness. And now there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And many leaders in the counseling world have also begun to combine the two, some of the ideas of yoga into therapy, and that really was a springboard for making it seem more legit than I think what maybe some in the field would say. So I had a private practice, and I had some clients who I had seen for a while, and just I was kind of at a crossroads with them. We had talked and talked and talked and talked and talked, and I thought, you know what? I wonder if we did something a little bit different. And so that just started me being a little creative about how I use yoga in sessions. And these were people who had an interest in yoga, so it wasn't just something completely new to them. And then from there, things progressed, and I started using more and more aspects of yoga in therapy settings. And then right after I graduated, I was hired at Capella University, and they're an online university, and I've been there for 14 years, and I am a core faculty. And right now, I actually don't teach courses. I oversee all of the residency courses related to the clinical training and the research training that all the psychology and counseling students attend. So I oversee the academic part. So I do all the faculty training, faculty development, curriculum management, curriculum development, all that kind of stuff, which is really neat. So that's a little bit about me. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in my PowerPoint, and this worked flawlessly before in our test run, so we'll see how it does here. Let me get it up. I don't think I'm sharing my screen quite yet. All right, hang on one second. Oh, there we go. I got to share the screen first. One thing I'm definitely not knowledgeable about is how in the world people came up with the technology to do what it is that we're doing right now. But I'm glad somebody did.
Makes it easy.
Yes, yes. So, you know, a couple more things I'll add in sharing a little bit about me is where I am in my yoga experience, because I do have a doctorate degree in clinical mental health counseling and been working in the counseling field since I was 21. So I won't tell you how long that is. It's been a lot of years. But when I started teaching yoga, as I said, I really was drawn to it, and I'm kind of a training junkie, so I went to a lot of trainings, and I did a lot of different styles of yoga. Some of them were much more physical than others, and I went through quite a bit of credentialing as a yoga instructor, and recently I ended up getting a credential, which is the CIAYT, which is a Certified International Association of Yoga Therapists. So the world of yoga, you can't call yourself a yoga therapist unless you've had 800 hours of training in yoga therapy, which included a lot of work with clients in yoga therapy. So I just got that credential this summer, so that was pretty exciting. And it took me about 4 years to go through all the training for that. So that's been pretty exciting. So it's kind of like I equate it to a doctorate in mental health counseling. So I have a doctorate in counseling and a doctorate in yoga. I ran across this photograph many, many years ago of Freud and the Buddha together and just thought it was always neat. So anyway. So what we're going to talk about here is how to, I'm just going to give you a very, very brief history on yoga and just point out some of the similarities that it has with mental health counseling, some of the counseling theories that you all are familiar with, and then give you some tools, point out some specific tools that you could use in therapy with your clients, and talk a little bit about the physical integration, which is probably what I'm going to focus on most, because I know that you guys will have sessions on breathing exercises and also mindfulness later in this series. But those are two huge parts of what I do. So I couldn't really leave them out, but I'll just touch on them a little bit. And then I was very lucky to have a client who allowed me to videotape him and in our sessions together. So I have 4 clips of some of our work together. It's a little bit hard to follow out of context of all of my work with him, because I saw him for several years, and we did several of these sessions together. But it'll at least give you a snapshot of what it looks like to do the thing that I do, which is really not complicated, but it really has been amazing with the people that I've worked with. Then we'll talk a little bit about how you might go about being educated to implement these tools, and then some of the ethics of implementing them as well. So just a historical comparison. So psychotherapy has only been around for about 150 years. It's quite new. And its philosophy is essentially that there is dysfunction within the individual. There's something wrong with the individual. There's a problem, and we have to fix it. And I know that some of the therapeutic applications from mental health counseling aren't quite that one-sided of something is wrong and there's a dysfunction within the individual. But typically, from where we came, this is the model. And yogic philosophy and yogic practices have been around for over 2,000 years. And there's a rich lineage of philosophy, of history, and of tools that are based on intuition and tools that are based on human connection. So it's much more experiential based, much more than generally than counseling is. But what's been really nice, I'm sure you all have heard of Marcia Linehan and Jon Kabat-Zinn, and they are the ones I was referencing earlier, who really brought to the forefront, in my opinion, these alternative treatments. And they did several years ago, which is great for our field because it really opens up. It really opens up so many tools that we can use and gives them credibility. So I just always like to thank them for the work that they did. So just a little bit about yogic philosophy and psychotherapy, how they're similar and maybe how they're a little bit different. So the similar goals are, they obviously want to promote health, self-awareness. They want to create change on a cognitive level, a behavioral level, an emotional level, find solutions, create non-judgmental environment. So these are things that they both want to do, but how they view problems are different. So for psychotherapy is the P there. It's part of genetic, it's life experiences, it's stress, whereas yoga, ultimately, yes, do they agree that there are some genetic components to the challenges we face? Yes. Do our experiences influence our thoughts, feelings, behaviors? Yes. Yogis believe that stress is the main culprit for everything, every mental and every physical ailment, that's stress and chronic stress in the body is what creates and exacerbates physical problems and emotional problems. But ultimately, they believe that it's separation from the divine. And what's nice about yogic philosophy and history is divine is defined the way that you want to. So it's based on your religious beliefs, your spiritual beliefs, and how you define what divine is to you. But it's ultimately that we are a small part of something much bigger. I know that sounds cliche, but we're a small but important part of something that's much bigger than ourselves. And throughout our lives, we become separated from that realization. And that separation from our spiritual, our divinity, is what creates stress. And then stress creates issues in the body. Issues in the body create issues in the mind, and vice versa. So how yoga and psychotherapy try to fix those problems is, in therapy, we try to reduce symptoms, we try to increase insight and understanding. And of course, I'm reducing this to very simple terms. And in yoga, we try to promote a union, a realization of a non-dualistic consciousness. So non-dualistic means that there's not a that and an us, but we become one. We're united. We are no longer separated from our spiritual selves and our divinity. So it's a little bit, it's a different way of viewing human beings. But when we look at some of the counseling theories that we use, humanistic theories in particular, there are even more similarities. And how I kind of define what it is that I do is it's bringing yoga into my practice of person-centered and Gestalt and existential therapy, because I'm a humanistic therapist. I don't really practice cognitive behavioral therapy, REBT. Those just don't fit with my philosophical beliefs, but they do for a lot of people, which is great. But I'm much more person-centered, Gestalt, and existential in my approach in counseling, and believe that it also can be done in few sessions, not 20 years. But when we look at some of the main components of these three theoretical approaches, there's a lot of similarities in the beliefs about yoga, the philosophy of yoga. So in person-centered, obviously we have unconditional regard for people, acceptance, it's client-directed. And it wants to promote self-understanding. We certainly want people to become more insightful and understanding of who they are. And Gestalt, we know, is very experiential. It's very much in the here and now. It's more holistic. There's kind of a mystical, energetic side and component and feel to Gestalt. It's very phenomenological, so client-centered worldview, experience in the moment, and a huge focus on awareness. And then existentialism, the realization of our true nature, being authentic, being genuine, and finding meaning. And if and when you read about yoga philosophy, these concepts are ubiquitous in yoga philosophy. So there's a lot of similarities across the humanistic theories, at least. Oh. Move on to the next slide. It's slightly stuck. Okay, there we go. I'm not going to go into details about clinical research. You guys probably have access to many of the research databases out there, but there is an abundance of research on how yoga and certain aspects of yoga. Yoga is kind of an umbrella term to many, many, many things. I teach 200-hour yoga trainings. I teach 300-hour yoga trainings. And in both of those trainings, for a combined 500 hours of training, we just hit the tip of the iceberg with what we learn about yoga. So the clinical research it's taking aspects of yoga and testing those aspects with different disorders, with different populations, and finding great success. So that's very promising. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about yoga philosophy in general, and then we'll go from there. So yogis believe that we are born with our nature, our true nature, and within that nature is that ultimate connection with divinity, with spirituality, and there's nothing that clouds our ability to live within that connection. But then we start to live life. We start to have life experiences. We start to think in different ways. And that kind of layers on stuff. So kind of think of a day. I know you guys have all seen days where you walk outside and there are no clouds in the sky. The sky is blue. You can see the sun. It goes on forever and ever and ever. And then there are days where it's partly cloudy. You can see some clouds. You can still see some of the sun. And then there's days where it's light outside, so we know the sun is there, but we can't really see it because there's so many clouds. So yogis kind of believe that we are always like the sun. That light and that truth, that genuineness, that congruence is always there in us. But because of so many things that we go through in life and the way that we are conditioned in so many ways, clouds layer on, and the light within us becomes a little bit more dim, a little bit harder for us to see, a little bit harder for the world to see. So through yoga philosophy, they believe that we have to figure out how to uncloud ourselves, how to get rid of those external layers of stuff that cloud our inner light. They also really believe in the connection of mind and body. And I know that sounds so cliche, but there is no mind-body separation. One cannot exist without the other. In fact, if they could define it, they would probably have just one word, which would mean mind and body. And there is no separation. If you do something to the body, you are doing something to the mind. If you are doing something to the mind, you are also doing something to the body. And so the hope is that we become more present and more receptive through mind and body, which can help to facilitate more change. So where do mental health issues reside? The mind and the body. So I just say don't limit treatment to the mind. That was one of the things that I discovered in talk therapy, working with so many clients who struggled with very, very complicated life histories and very complex traumas, that talking only did so much. And you can talk and talk and talk, and it certainly makes a difference. But I realized that you can't ignore the body, because the body has a voice. We don't often listen to that voice of the body. And so bringing yoga in helps us to do that. And yoga philosophy, when we apply the techniques, it also helps to decrease our defenses. So yoga, they want to enrich our experiences. It's kind of that idea of mindfulness, that everything, we soak in everything, every single bit of every single moment. We take it all in, we value it. They emphasize the need to get out of our head and get into our body, and to be more rather than to see more and do more. Yoga philosophy nurtures centeredness, groundedness, of course, uniting physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And one of the things that yoga philosophy really talks a lot about is reducing that automatic pilot. They don't use these same terms, but it's about living in the moment rather than living in the trauma 5 years ago, or the argument that you had with your spouse a year ago. It's about being in the moment and having all of the information available to you in that moment for you to be able to make a more centered and more grounded decision on choices in life. So yoga is it's a way of life. It's not just a practice. Sorry, my mouse freaks out a little bit when I'm in an online environment. It always does that. It kind of jumps around a little bit. Let me go back. Okay, yeah. So it's a way of life, promoting homeostasis. So homeostasis, getting back to that point where there is a connection, there's a union of mind, body, spirit, and of divinity. And here, yoga actually means union. And the ultimate goal is union of the human self and the divine. All right, so Patanjali is one of many yoga philosophers, but Patanjali gave us our first thorough kind of handbook of yoga, and honestly so the sutras, it's about 200 aphorisms, so about 200 little bits of philosophy that have been interpreted by many people for a lot of years. And only 2 of those 200 sayings talk at all about physical posture. So in the West, of course, physical yoga is all about downward dog and warriors and standing on your head and all of that. But the truth about yoga is that is a very, very, very small component of what yoga is. So in the sutras, Patanjali, he pretty much describes what yoga is and how to be yoga rather than how to do yoga, which is very different. So he talks about it as cessation of mental fluctuations and knowledge of the self. So mental fluctuations he defines as anything that takes you from being in the present moment. It could be a bad distraction. It could be a benign distraction. But if you guys have ever meditated before, I hear this over and over again. People say, I can't meditate because I'm thinking about a million things. Well, probably some of those things are annoying. Like, I can't believe that person was texting in the car and I had to wait behind that green light, for what felt like 15 minutes before we went. To, I have an itch, which is benign. So the cessation of mental fluctuations is about being in the present moment and disconnecting from anything that takes you out of that present moment experience. And then knowledge of yourself. So knowledge of yourself in very, very profound ways, more phenomenological ways than, well, I know how I cope with A, B, and C, which is important, but Patanjali and yoga practices go way beyond just cognitive realization of who we are and what we do. So he also created some practices and some traditions, and he created this thing called the 8-limbed path, which is, I kind of see it as the yoga treatment plan. So the 8-limbed path, it's kind of 8 practices. They're much more than practices, but 8 practices that will lead someone to that ultimate connection. And I'm not going to go into detail about what those 8 are. I would pick up a sutras book, and you can review that. You can Google 8-limbed path and it'll tell you all about it, but it's things about how you are day to day, how you treat yourself, how you treat other people. It includes the physical practice of yoga, the practice of breathing, of pranayama, practice of meditation, practice of concentration, because concentration, Patanjali says, is different than meditation. It also talks about withdrawal of the senses, which helps us to be more mindful in the moment. So many parts to that 8-limbed path. And the further along the path you get, the more complex and complicated those practices are. So kind of one of the foundations of yoga therapy is this 5 kosha model. And this is their, I don't want you to get too lost in the words, but yoga is a holistic approach, and yoga therapists and yoga therapy has a long history in different aspects of Indian philosophy. I don't know if you've ever heard of Samkhya philosophy, but that's where the koshas come from. But they say that there are 5 aspects to a person, and I've listed 3 here because the other 2 are much more spiritually based. But the first kosha is the physical body, and it's everything related to the physical body: bones, muscle, organs, bodily functions, body systems, processes. The next one is the energy body. So that's, I know later next year you'll be talking about chakras. So it's talking about chakras, energy, the things we can't see, but that do impact our functioning. And the third kosha is the mental, emotional body. So yoga practitioners look at all aspects of a person and kind of assesses how are these koshas functioning, where are their challenges in the physical body, where are their challenges in the emotional body, how they're all related. And once they understand that, then they know what practices to implement for a person. So I kind of think of it as a computer analogy. The A is the computer. So the Anamaya kosha, the physical body, is your computer. You know, it's your computer that you guys are sitting right in front of. You've got to have it. But if there's no electricity going to the computer, is your computer going to work? So P, the pranamaya kosha, the energy body, is like the electricity that comes to your computer. You have to have the computer and you have to have the electricity. And then the M is like the software. So without this Zoom software, we wouldn't be able to do this either. So yogis look at the body in that way. We have a physical body that we must have. We have an energetic body that fuels the physical body, that also informs the physical body. And then we have a mental, emotional body that impacts and informs both the physical and energetic body. So you can't just treat one part. And as I said, the other 2 koshas are related to spiritual body. And I didn't list them here, not because they're not important, but we only have a limited amount of time. And we could talk about this for days. So I'll talk a little bit about the physical connection. I feel like we have the most amazing and underutilized tool for emotional well-being, which is our own body. Our own bodies give us so much information and are so useful to helping us get to a point of realization, but we don't give it that credit. We don't give it that attention. Emotions, sensations, experiences all find a place in your body. They're all somewhere. Just like we talk about the unconscious mind and all of our experiences are back there somewhere. All those experiences are somewhere in your body, and they're somewhere in your body where there are a lot of experiences, and that's probably the places where you get pains, you get aches, you get stagnant, you get injuries. That's how yogis explain those types of things. So it's not just by accident that we hurt ourselves or get ailments. So through physical awareness, it helps lead to cognitive and emotional change. Once we kind of understand and give credit to the experience of our bodies, we become more insightful. And that insight, of course, if you're a humanistic therapist, believes can create change. Our bodies ask us to be more aware of our true nature. And when we get to a point of really close, informed physical awareness, we can appreciate our lives moment to moment. So now I'm just kind of shifting gears a little bit about, probably you guys are asking, well, how do you use this in therapy? You've talked a lot about, stuff that I can't really use in therapy. So what can I use? So when I integrated yoga into therapy, what I did was I used typically one of these 4 postures, and I just had the English version, and you can just see I just used a blanket, so you don't need any fancy equipment to do it. But One thing that you might notice about all these physical positions is a level of physical vulnerability. I had people do this in my office. So they got on the floor and they took these positions while we talked. And when you guys get to the point of talking about chakras, this will become even more relevant. It might close a gap of understanding of why these positions in particular. But it's not accidental. It's not accidental that these positions are ones that help to facilitate body awareness and quite a bit of emotional catharsis. So you can see this first one that says legs up the wall. All it is just elevating somebody's hips a little bit and then their legs. And then lying with support at the knees. So they're just lying on their back. I had clients lying on their back for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. So you want them to be comfortable. And then support at the shoulder blades. That one was a little more dramatic. I would use that position for people who maybe I had done a couple of the other positions with, because when your chest is expanded in that way and your arms are over your head, it's even more vulnerable. I mean, just imagine, your heart is exposed, and we all kind of associate emotions being in our heart center. So when you expose that in such a way, it certainly brings a lot of stuff to the forefront of the mind. And then support along the spine is, it's just a blanket folded along, and they're lying back on it along the spine with their head elevated a little bit. And this will make sense in a minute too. Let me go on to the next. So since it's 7:36 and I want you guys to see this little clip of work that I did with this client, what I'll just talk about breath practice is it's integral to what I did. And even though you're not going to see it in the video, we always started with breath practices. We always started with breath awareness, just being in the moment. That breath is an anchor to the present moment. Breath is an anchor to the present moment. It helps you stay in this moment. And in particular for people who have trauma, who spend most of their conscious awareness in moments in their past life or past, history, maybe their past lives, their breath is what grounds them and keeps them in the moment. Let's go on. And then mindfulness. Mindfulness and breath, you really can't do one without doing the other. So mindfulness is about being aware of what's happening in the moment, and the practice of breath helps us to do that. And I'm not going to go through that. So, who might we use yoga for in therapy? Well, these are the types of people that I found it being successful for. People who really couldn't articulate verbally. I mean, we ask a lot of people to come in and talk to us, to tell us everything about themselves, when probably their number one problem is communication. So we're relying on a skill that people really struggle with. People who are highly emotional, believe it or not, you'll see from the video clip that this client is a bit emotional, but typically he's not emotional. It's just this was a very emotional experience for him. Those who tend to intellectualize, I've had worked with a lot of clients who are constantly in their head. I put them down on the floor in one of those positions and we start talking and I see a whole different side of them. People who are emotionally incongruent, the emotions that are being expressed when talking about a particular something doesn't quite fit, usually from defenses. People with a lot of somatic complaints, people who have very little understanding of who they are, people who are impulsive, and then stress-related illnesses. So there's a climate that needs to be created for you to be able to do this. One is if your therapeutic approach is not one of introspection and support, these probably won't work for you. You do rely quite a bit on a person being introspective, but it's with your guidance. I mean, it's not that you're leading them or they are leading you. You're actually kind of on a walk together. in a place that's really unknown. So they're putting some pieces together, you're putting some pieces together to figure out something. And I know it all sounds so indescript, but that's how it is. I never knew what was going to happen with a client, and I never promised them that anything would happen, that we would just be, experience it, and see what would happen. But I'll tell you, something happened almost every time I did it.
One of the ways that I've described it, Jana, is holding space. I never really understood what that meant until I started doing energy-related work.
Yes.
Holding space.
Yes. Yep. I do a bit of preparation with them. So I tell them, this is what we're going to do. This is what it's going to look like. But I don't really know what it's going to end up being like. And this is a safe space, and we'll just see. We're just going to explore it together. And we always do the centering, which is, the being in the moment, the breathing, the just kind of feeling their body. What do they notice? What's going on? And we just have that conversation. Just, that just kind of gets them centered, because without being centered to some degree, centered in the moment, the work's going to be more difficult. I don't have any expectations about what's going to happen, and I coach them into trying their best not to have expectations and emphasize the experience. And the breath awareness and the mindfulness piece, they're really integral to the physical posture. So I'm going to show you a clip. It's actually 4 clips. The first one is about 8 minutes. I'll just show you a little piece of that because it's just he and I talking about, we kind of were debriefing after the previous session we had, which I did not video, which I wish I would have, because he had a catharsis. He had like a serious emotional catharsis. And it surprised the dickens out of both of us that it happened. He was describing something that he was feeling, and then all of a sudden this feeling became very, very overwhelming, and it led him back to a childhood experience that was quite profound with his mother. And he wailed. I mean, I would describe him as stoic. He wailed and screamed and cried. And of course, I'm sitting there with my eyes as big as they are now thinking, oh my goodness, what have I done? I have broken this man. But after it was all said and done, we processed, and we realized that there was a huge meaning. And I had been working with him for quite some time. I would say a couple years before we even started this work. So this is a little bit about him. He's an older gentleman. His father died when he was young, so he didn't have a male role model. His mom had Alzheimer's, and he didn't have a real close relationship with her. His mom was emotionally disconnected. She did provide for them, but she was cold. He's had a history of unhealthy intimate relationships. He's socially awkward. He has a very healthy, close relationship with his daughter, but he lacks self-confidence, self-esteem. He's always struggled with depression, anxiety. He actually came in to see me because of sexual inadequacy, and then we realized there was so much more behind that. And he, like I even wrote here, he had flat affect. He was quite non-emotional. In fact, after the first couple of sessions he came in, I thought for sure he would stop coming because it didn't seem like he even liked being there. But I ended up seeing him off and on for probably, it's been several years. That's a little bit about him. So let me go to this first clip here. And so we're kind of processing a little bit of what happened. The sound is not super loud, so you might need to turn your volume up. But there are captions so you can see what's being said.
I guess as much as anything, it's important for me to know some sort of a concept of where it's coming from, or if there is something that eventually I'll discover that will be good for me. Or it's just the purging what's necessary. It seems like there's something there that I need to get past. I don't know what it is.
So you're just kind of open to it being possibly many different things.
Right.
Something
I have no
to
idea.
it that's good, and there's something to it that's not so good, and that it might just be a process of letting go, cleansing.
It's loneliness, it's happiness, it's love, it's resentment, it's everything. And it's exciting in a way because I discovered a place inside, but I want to know that obviously I've been doing better the last few weeks, so it's not hurting me in that respect, but I want to know what it is. It's a power. And I don't know if controlling it is important or just realizing something that will make it more useful.
It's still very mysterious.
Scary.
Well, you actually have the answer much more clearly than I have the answer, believe it or not. And one way that we might be able to discover that is to kind of get back to that place again, which I'm sure is part of the anxiety of coming here, fearing that I may say that.
Okay.
So what do you think about that?
I think it's scary and exciting at the same time. As I said, I've really been happy with what I've done with myself over the past 2 weeks when I've made a lot of positive changes. So it's not something that's harmful, it's anything that's something good, but it's still scary.
Yeah. What was that that word that we kind of discovered last time?
I hope you put it down.
I don't know if I wrote it down, but I remember it. If you remember it, but yeah, I did write it down.
Peace is freedom. But I don't know if freedom is important, or it's the fear of freedom. I mean, the fear of being alone too. It's a hard one to figure out. But I know that I've mentioned it a lot. And as you remember, it came up when I was talking about growing up with my mom, that was freedom and it felt good. And the first couple of times I was here, I mentioned freedom. When I was in a relationship that was really hard at the time. And it's been a recurring theme, it seems like, yeah, I would say so.
Kind of inadvertently.
Right. And I don't know if it's me speaking out freedom or if it's a fear of being alone. Saying, I think freedom is important to me, but I don't know, I haven't figured that out yet, why I've used that example several times. Do you see how it could be either way?
I think I'm still not quite sure about the second part, the fear of being alone.
Do you think the freedom is more, if I keep repeating that, it might be more the thing?
The freedom could have so many, well, it has so many different interpretations. And maybe we haven't quite figured out what interpretation is exactly the one that fits for you right now. So freedom may not necessarily be that you're not in a relationship or that you're in a relationship.
Might be freedom to control what I do.
And to be who you truly are, maybe.
To make decisions for myself and not for other people.
And there's something to be said about making decisions that and feeling confident in your decisions. That's freedom. When you feel taxed by I made this decision, but I only made it because this person wanted it, or that's what this person said is the right thing, or I feel this pressure because this is what's expected of me. That's not a decision made with a sense of freedom.
Okay, so I'll pause it there. It seemed like the voice was quite a bit ahead of the words, so hopefully you guys got a little bit of sense of our processing there. So let me go to the next clip, and I'm watching the time, but the next one is where we engage in another session using the posture.
So it's got something really important that it wants you to know. The more you express it, the more it knows you're listening.
What do you want? What do I want?
Yeah, ask it. Ask it again what it wants.
What do you want? Ears are ringing. I'm feeling very, very hot. Not hot exactly.
When you're asking it what it wants, where is that spot? Where is that place where that?
I don't know.
Okay. Let's try to find it. So maybe you might need to ask again.
Where are you? I'm in your heart.
So it's in your heart. It's right there in your heart. You want to roll up to your side?
Oh, no, right now I feel pretty good this way.
Right. So part of the mystery is solved. You know where it is.
What do you want? What do I want?
Can you guys hear me, Susan?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm having a little bit of a hard time getting out of this.
Do you want to go all the way up to the top and stop sharing the screen? And
Okay. Well, for some reason, none of that was showing up for me for a second, but now it just came back.
okay.
Okay.
I know sometimes you have to kind of roll things around, and if your
Yeah.
mouse.
So
we
I
could
know
see
that
it. Yeah, we could see it.
okay. I have, this one goes on for a few more minutes, and then I have a couple more, which I know we don't have time for. We have 5 more minutes. But basically what you see here is when he and I had met before and he had this catharsis, what he felt was this very, very dark place. And he didn't know he didn't know what it was about. He didn't know what it meant. He just felt it. It was an overwhelming, like I said, it was a catharsis, but it's still, as I referred to it, it was a mystery. We didn't know what it meant or what we needed to do with it. So this next session was trying to figure out where that was in his body and talk to it as if it's kind of this alive entity, because really it is. So that was the conversation, is him asking, where are you? And then he finally realized it was in his heart, which, being in that physical position and that vulnerable position, does help one to connect more in a physical way. And it's not always in people's heart. Sometimes it's in people's feet. Sometimes it's in their shoulders. Sometimes it's in their head. Sometimes it's in their belly. But for him, it was in his heart. And then so we continue to have this conversation about what it meant. And you could see I write a lot of verbatim of what the client says, because when I talk to them, I want to use the words that they're using with some interpretation on my part. But I'm more of connecting the pieces that they give to me versus me coming up with something brand new that's really not genuine to what they've just discovered. So I always wrote down word for word important things that they said. And so this was a very Gestalt-like conversation, and being in this physical position helps to promote the awareness of the body, and their body becomes a much bigger part of the process. And he and I made more progress in these first few sessions of doing it this way than we did sitting on the couch talking to each other for the 2 years previous.
Yeah. So Jana, as I'm seeing the video, I'm thinking about the trauma release exercises that look pretty similar. And one of the participants, Barb, is asking if you ever find clients reacting violently.
That has not been my experience, no.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
It seems
It's
to me
really
that the body kind of mitigates some of that.
Yeah, well, yes, and the relationship. Now the catharsis that he had, it wasn't violent, but it was extremely dramatic. And it really kind of scared me, because he was one of the first clients I did this with. So, but I just kind of, hold that space, and it's okay. And, even in this clip, you saw there was a point where I said, do you want to turn over to your side? Because I couldn't tell if he was uncomfortable, too vulnerable. And he said he was fine. He said it felt good. And I, in the moment, thought, wow, okay, well, that's not what I was reading. So I'm glad I asked and didn't assume.
Thanks. So we have a few minutes more. So I think we've got some folks that are fading out because of going to class. But if you want to go over a few minutes, you're welcome to. And those folks that have a commitment after 8, you know that you can come back and listen to the recording later.
Sure. Yep. So what I'll do is I'll just go over a few of the ethical considerations. And honestly, there were just a couple that I immediately thought of, which is, you need to have some competency in what you're doing. So if you want to use something like this in therapy, practice it. Practice it on your friends. Practice it on your spouse. Just practice the process of holding the space for someone. You talk about something a little different. I'm not saying go out and do therapy with all your friends, but there's a level of comfort you're going to have to establish for yourself when you're doing something new, and you don't really want to test that out with a vulnerable client. And then consider the client's worldview. I've had clients that in no way in the world would ever want to do something like this. And so I make sure that this intervention is going to fit in their worldview. And I often don't even introduce it as yoga intervention, because I know that comes with a huge set of assumptions from some perspective. Not that I'm misleading them, but honestly, it's taking pieces of yoga that we do, that we should be doing in our lives in general, and putting them into the therapeutic space. And then the timing of the intervention. I wouldn't do this in the very beginning few sessions with clients. I mean, I would have some sessions with them build that relationship, so they know they're willing to lie on the floor in your office in that vulnerable position while you're sitting there. I always sat off to the side of the person's head, because I feel like that energetic space was the best positioning. And they need to feel comfortable with you sitting there. It's a level of comfort within some discomfort.
It also looks like you have a separate space for those exercises or those past positions versus talk therapy. What's the sort of distance between the two of them?
You mean like literal distance?
Yeah. Is it in another room that you use? No. It's in the same room. Yep.
So this office I had was a quite large office, and I had a couch and chair set up on one side and then open space on the other, and that's where I had the mat. But then in my office I have now, it's smaller, and we just lay out the mat right there between the chair and the couch. Yeah. But I always sit on the floor with them, which I try not to move much, and by the end of it, my legs are pretty much falling asleep, but yeah. So training, I don't think that you need to have an extensive training in yoga. You certainly do need to have an understanding of mind-body connection and understand the value of examining what's in a person's body, and equating it as having value just as what's in their mind and thoughts. I would suggest having a general understanding of yoga, of its historical components, of its philosophy. The 8-limbed path is a good place to start. Have some knowledge of some yoga practices. Maybe you have a yoga practice where you do the physical practices, you do the pranayama techniques. That's great, because I do a lot of that with people as well. It's just not what I brought into this presentation, but we just do physical practices. I've done that a lot with people with trauma, that we don't really do talk therapy. We do more yoga-based practices, but for that, I think you do have to have much more yoga training. But to integrate some of the physical postures and to have that type of conversation with someone that's a very Gestalt-like conversation, is so much different when they're lying there on the floor in that position versus sitting on the couch. And you have to certainly be willing to do some self-study and genuineness. That's the big thing. Is I'm very much client-directed and client-centered. In fact, I don't know if you could get it from the first video clip, but when I told him that, he had the answers much more clearly than I had the answers, it's just creating the environment to get to those answers. Because I can't tell him what his answers are, because they would really be my answers for him. And then my last slide here are just some yoga resources. There's tons of information out there, but these last few books are some of the most recently published books that are specifically geared towards these types of things. So this first one, Overcoming Trauma Through Yoga, it's by a yoga therapist and a psychologist, I believe. And so they talk about how to use a lot of the yoga therapy techniques with people with trauma. Yoga for anxiety is about how to use yoga for anxiety. I don't know the credentials of these authors. I don't remember. This next book, Yoga for Emotional Balance, Bo Forbes is a yoga therapist, and she's also a psychologist. So her book's great. And then Yoga Skills for Therapists. So this was very recently published. So Amy Weintraub is a yoga teacher and therapist who's done quite a bit of work with yoga and depression. In fact, there's some information up here. She has a book called Yoga for Depression, and she also has a CD that has breathing exercises for depression, Breathe, Beat the Blues. And so she came up, she has this book right here. If you're interested, she talks about things that you can do in your therapy sessions that are very doable. So I would certainly make those recommendations. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. This was so exciting. I could just go on and on forever, which I'm sure all of your speakers can, but it's just so exciting.
Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful. I'm really grateful that you participated.
You're so very welcome. All right, well, take care, everyone, and I'll probably see you in February when it's chakra time.
Yes,
Thanks,
I'm glad you
Lynn.
said that, because I was going to say Jana will be back when we're talking about chakras, but next year in 2018 for the second half of the Institute. Thanks for joining us. Thank you again. What is it? Grazie mille.
I know, I can't remember those.
1,000 thank yous for your presentation and for your enthusiasm. And you know, it occurred to me too, Jana, you're really one of the pioneers in this. Amongst the first, right? First wave. So I really appreciate your sharing your information.
Well, you're very welcome. Namaste.
Namaste. We'll see you soon then.
All right. Bye, Christine. Bye, Suzanne.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.